your host, Dr. Mijiza Sanchez-Guzman, Associate Dean of the Office of Medical Student Affairs and the founder of the First Generation Mentorship Program at Stanford Medicine, and I am proud to be first generation. Many of us are the first in our families to accomplish living the dream. Being the first means different things to different people. Join me now on a journey as we share our stories about how we've navigated being first generation in academic medicine. I will have the honor and pleasure of interviewing first generation clinicians, leaders, mentors, students, faculty, and researchers as they share their lived experiences of being the first. I hope these stories will inspire the next generation of leaders in health sciences. Dr. Ethan Nicholls received his BA from Harvard University, his MD from Stanford University, and completed his anesthesia residency and fellowship in pain management at the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF. He joined the Palo Alto Medical Foundation in 2015, where he currently serves as the chair of the Department of Anesthesia, Alameda Division. Previously, he was the senior partner and served as president of Northern California Anesthesia Associates, a private practice anesthesia group. After initially completing his residency and fellowship training, Dr. Nicholls held the position of assistant professor of anesthesiology and pain management at UCSF before leaving for private practice and working at El Camino Real Hospital and later Washington Hospital. In addition to his clinical practice, Dr. Nicholls held numerous positions. He is the current president-elect of the Stanford Medicine Alumni Association Board of Governors and is a mentor in our first generation mentorship program here at Stanford. He has served as a member of the Board of Trustees at Castanea High School in Palo Alto. Dr. Nicholls has two daughters and is a season ticket holder of Stanford women's basketball and enjoys traveling and attending theater and the San Francisco Opera. Welcome, Dr. Nicholls. It's so lovely to have you with us.
Mijiza, thank you so much. It is really a pleasure and really an honor to be on with you today. I'm such a fan of yours because I think that what you're doing with the First Gen program is just some very important work. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. The feeling is so very mutual. Huge fan. Let's jump into it.
All right.
Would you share a bit about your background and what led you to the field of academic medicine and Stanford?
Sure. I think when I think about my career, my arc, my experiences, I always have to go back to the first 12 years of my life. And that's where it all started. And in many ways, I consider those first 12 years the most formative years of my life because there was a certain amount of confidence and a certain mindset that was set at that time. So both my parents are from Barbados. I was born in Aruba. My dad was working in Aruba at the time, so I was there for a year. And then after that year, I moved back to Barbados with my mom and then spent the next 11 years or until the age of 12 on the island. And it was basically on the island that the value and importance of education was instilled in me by my parents. But in addition to that, an extremely high standard was set by my father academically. So in Barbados, around the age of 9, you take a competitive national exam to determine what secondary school you will be attending. And I was admitted to Harrison College, which is probably considered the most prestigious secondary school in the British West Indies. It was a school that was founded back in, I think, 1733. The majority of prime ministers from the island are graduates of Harrison College. And at Harrison College, you are graded, not just graded, you are ranked in every individual class and overall in every form. And so my dad gave me a mantra. He used to tell me, you have to be number 1. Number 2 is okay. Number 3 is acceptable. Now, I don't advocate that level of stress, if you will, for most people. For me, I did not find it stressful. And fortunately for me, I think I was able to meet his metrics. But what it did for me was set an expectation of what he thought I could and should accomplish. So after 2 years at Harrison College, we immigrated to the United States. And that decision was, if not completely, was certainly primarily driven by the fact that he thought there would be more educational opportunities and just opportunities in general for me. And so I attended high school for a year or so in Boston, then Cambridge, and then went from high school to Harvard, and then from Harvard to Stanford. Now, that trip was not linear. And I always tell my mentees, you may get from A to Z, but it's not necessarily going to be a straight line. And I will probably unpack some of the issues that occurred when we first came to this country. But when I was going to apply to college, and when I was applying to medical school to Stanford, I really thought I was coming to Stanford to become a psychiatrist. And so when I attended Harvard, like most immigrants, I was always told I had to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer. I soon established that that was not something that was, that people from the Caribbean or the West Indies, could claim as, as their own. A lot of my friends who are immigrants, a lot of my friends who are Jewish, all told me the same story. But the bottom line is, I thought I was coming to Stanford to be a psychiatrist, and that changed basically along the way and changed over time. So when I got to Harvard, I was told I should be a biology major, because if I wanted to go to medical school, I should major in a science, because I could essentially kill two birds with one stone. I subsequently was very unhappy because I really had an interest in philosophy and psychology and history. And my second year at Harvard, I was basically knee-deep in organic chemistry, physics, and I think another upper-level chemistry class, and I was only taking one history course. So at that time, I decided to take a leave of absence. I ultimately thought I was going to apply to graduate school in psychology to get a PhD. And then later, I ended up having what is now called an internship, working at Massachusetts Mental Health Center, where I got to be exposed to Joseph Schildkraut, who was a Harvard-trained physician, psychiatrist, who did a lot of research on the biochemistry of depression and mental illness. And I decided at that time that if I really wanted to study that and I was fascinated by it, I should go to medical school. Fast forward, I came to medical school. After a year, I decided I didn't want to be a psychiatrist, and ended up, because of a number of mentors that I had at Stanford and different research that I got involved with, decided to pursue anesthesia. And that's how I ended up applying to UCSF in residency and becoming an anesthesiologist. Sort of long story, but there are a lot of different deviations and derailments in the story along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. We're going to unpack some of that. So, can you tell me when did you first become aware of your first gen identity?
Um, Obviously, the term first gen did not exist when I was in high school or college or even medical school for that matter. But I think I became aware of first gen, and I look at first gen, and my theory, my approach in first gen is, I call it the dearth of the three A's. And that's really when I became aware of that, was at Harvard. And the three A's are access, primarily informational access, assets, and advocacy. So when I got to Harvard for the first time, obviously I knew there were people who were wealthy and who had a lot of money, but it's a different story when you're in an environment side by side with people who are second, third generation family members who've gone to Harvard, people who are, traveling to Europe throughout the summer, going to the Cape for a little bit of the weekend. I had a work grant scholarship, so I had to work during the summer. I found people who their parents knew somebody who they were able to make phone calls on their behalf. So what I became aware of was, again, I coined that phrase, the dearth of the three A's. And that for me is when I became of my first gen status. I will say that I was very fortunate that at Harvard, in my living situation, I was surrounded by a number of people who were very similar. So my roommate was first generation Italian. His parents had come over from Italy. They were bricklayers. His dad was a bricklayer. So he, again, first generation in his family to go to college. Across the hall, there was a woman whose parents had come from Greece. She was the first one in her family. So I was very fortunate in that I found a community as an undergrad at Harvard amidst many of the wealthy students who shared a similar background to me, even though we were obviously different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. And I felt that that was really a source of strength for me. But if I were to say, that was probably the first time I became aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. What are some of the barriers or challenges you faced as you pursued your education or career in medicine?
So I will start by saying I've been fortunate that I don't think any of the barriers or challenges have prevented me from accomplishing many of the goals, or most of all of the goals that I really wanted. But again, going back to one of the three A's, I will share two experiences where clearly the lack of informational access could have been significant in my career. So I said we immigrated to this country when I was 12, and the educational system in Barbados is definitely more advanced in terms of the education, the overall general educational system in the United States. So when we came here, my father, again, focused on my education, asked a neighbor about schools and about high schools, and I was 12 years old. So this particular woman told my father there are two high schools, not far away down the street, about 20 minutes walking. And she said, oh, they're both, good high schools. So one day my father um, we walked down and we went to the first high school. Now, the two high schools are directly across the street from each other. One of them is Boston Latin and one of them is Boston English. Many people, you may not be aware of Boston Latin, or maybe a lot of people don't, but Boston Latin is the oldest it's a public exam school. It's the oldest existing high school in the United States. It was established in 1635, and you have to realize that Harvard was established in 1636. So it was actually established before Harvard was there. And the reason I bring that up is a lot of my friends, obviously, it's basically a feeder school for Harvard. A lot of them told me, well, Harvard was basically developed or established so we would have a place to go to college. So that's how old and how prestigious Boston Latin is and was. So we went to Boston Latin. They were not welcoming. They were not supportive. I think, and I don't really want to hypothesize as to why that was. They explained to my dad that it was an exam entrance school, and I think I'd missed the deadline for the exam. And so they said, well, in all general respects, he's probably not going to be possible for him to come here for at least another year. So we walked across the street to Boston English, which was, I don't know what it is now, but was a large urban high school with all the problems, lack of resources, and issues that you think of when you think of a large urban high school. But as most students at that school were students of color, they were welcoming, they were supportive. They calmly explained that it was April, we immigrated in April, that the school year was coming to an end, and it would make more sense for my father to enroll me in a junior high, and then possibly then I could start that come in fall. They also said, well, your son's 12 years old. We're not sure he's quite prepared for high school. And my dad, of course, said, of course he's adequately academically prepared. You can just give him a test. And they literally marched me into a room and actually gave me an exam, which I had to take cold. So I took an exam. Bottom line is they determined that I was adequately academically prepared for high school. And they said, sure, we will actually have your son, happy to have your son start in September. So my dad put me in a local junior high school. And the following September, I started at Boston English. I don't know if I can get across to you the night and day difference between Boston Latin and Boston English. We had no idea. My parents didn't have an idea. I didn't have an idea of the differences between those schools and the impact it could have had on me if I'd actually stayed in Boston English. Luckily for me, we moved to Cambridge and I attended Cambridge Latin, which formerly was an exam entrance school, but they had done away with the entrance exam, but also had a very developed college prep program. And so I actually ended up going to, Cambridge Latin for the majority of my high school years and graduated from Cambridge Latin and went to Harvard. So that was the first story. The second story is college. Is high school when I was applying to college. So I had taken the standardized tests and I'd done well. And I got in a letter from BU saying that, based on my scores, et cetera, I would probably qualify for an academic scholarship. So in my mind, I thought that I was actually going to BU, which I'm sure is a fine institution. But that's all I knew. I had gotten a letter, they were going to give me money, it's a done deal. My physics teacher finally said to me one day, where are you applying to colleges? I said, oh, I'm probably going to be going to Boston University. He said, well, have you applied to any of the Ivy League schools? I'm like, Ivy League schools? What's that? I knew of Harvard because it was 20 minutes from my house, and I knew of Yale because everybody from, an immigrant family knows those two schools. But I didn't realize the differences between resources, potential connections, what an Ivy League school education had to offer. So my guidance counselor was not any help. But until a physics teacher took an interest in me, interceded and told me I really needed to do that, I would never have applied to Harvard. So I ultimately applied to Harvard and Yale. I was accepted at both and ended up going to Harvard because it was closer to my house. So I point out those two stories because it really gets to the core of the matter of why first-gen mentoring is so important to me. If you don't have the information, you can't make the right decision. You can't make the decision that's in your best interest. And so that's two classic stories of lack of informational access.
I love that. And I love the irony that although you didn't go to the feeder school, you
Right.
still ended up at Harvard anyway.
And a lot of those people were my friends because I lived with a number of them. That's how I know the story that Harvard was built for them.
That's awesome. I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing. What do you wish you knew before entering the world of academic medicine?
So, obviously I'm not fully in academic medicine, was in academic medicine for a short period of time before I went into private practice. I think the one thing that I did learn ultimately, but I think everybody can learn early, is really the value of mentors. Um, as we go through this interview, we may talk about it, but I've been very fortunate that I've had numerous mentors, especially, focusing at Stanford Medicine, that's really impacted my career significantly. And I think that that is something I try to get across to all my mentees really early, is that you should try and find as many mentors as you can. And because they can all offer you different pieces of advice in terms of not only your career, but your life. And so you may have a mentor who is really important in terms of, if you're pursuing an academic career in terms of research, you may have a mentor who's had an interest in or similar life history that can give you an an ex his or her experience as to how they got to a certain point. I always try to, sometimes when I can, bring my wife into the equation, because we're a two physician family. And I think that sometimes being able to, as especially if I have female mentees, being able to see what the challenges and the rewards are of being a woman in medicine. So I think that that's the one thing that I wish I'd gotten much earlier, although I think I did pick it up early. I think I really started to understand the value of that when I was at Harvard, but really ratcheted that up when I got to Stanford.
Hmm. Hmm. What advice would you give someone who's interested in pursuing a career in academic medicine?
Obviously, if you really are going to go in academic medicine, you need to obviously have the best training that's possible. Um, so that's basically the groundwork. You have to be prepared. I think the other thing that I always tell, people who are either applying to medical school or looking at residencies, make sure if you have the option to go to a program with resources. Having money, and I will use that as just an overall general term for resources, gives you an advantage just in terms of being able to do research if you're a medical student, right? I mean, at some point I can tell you about my experience with being able to do med scholars program at Stanford. Having a school that has money that allows you opportunities is better than being at a school, even if they have great teaching, that doesn't have money or resources that you can pursue an academic career. Also, find an institution that is supportive. Find an institution that will have both faculty and systems to allow you to thrive.
Mm.
And I think obviously having mentors, and I always say not just having mentors, but having people who would be advocates. For me, there are people who are supportive, they're mentors, and then the upper level of a mentorship is somebody who's going to be an advocate. And I was very fortunate to have that at Stanford.
Hmm. Hmm. How has being first generation shaped how you've approached your career?
Oh boy. Going back to my father, it's shaped me from the point of view of always wanted to go to the best institutions. I think that that's something that my dad ingrained in me, like I said, about standards. And, there is no one best per se, but there are definitely programs and training situations that most people would consider in an upper echelon. So in many ways, while I was coming to Stanford for medical school, um, going to, having the options of going to a number of programs, and ended up going to UCSF for residency. I've always wanted to go to the places where I could get the best training.
Mhm.
So that's, I think also I've been influenced by the fact that, going back to the dearth of the three A's, I've never wanted to have that. I've never wanted to have that. I've never wanted my kids to have that. And I've always been driven by the ability to provide a situation so that people who are like me, who are first gen, don't have that. So if you look at a number of things that I've done, I've always, as in the musical Hamilton, or I've always wanted to be in the room. I've always wanted to be a person who had influence into the policy, whether it's a independent school, being at Stanford on the board, being in the private practice group that I was in. I've always wanted to be able to correct a situation or change a situation that to me seemed not quite equal in the terms of people who are having access to it. for example, when I joined the private practice group that I ultimately was president of and was senior partner, they'd never had a Black person in that group. They had one woman and they had one person who was Asian. And in all the years that that group existed, until I came into the group, they'd never had a Black person in that group. I quickly became president over the next 15, 20 years, however long it was I was president. We were able to actually diverse that practice in terms of significant number of women, people of color, etc. So it's being first gen has always pushed me to try to make the situation better in terms of giving people the options, the chance to be in situations that they would normally be shut out from.
Thank you for doing that.
Somebody did it for me. So,
Mm-hmm. Do you believe your first generation status influenced your career choices and trajectory? And if so, what ways?
um, I don't think it affected my decision in terms of the specialty that I'm in. But I think in reference to what we just talked about, that's how it affected my trajectory. Um, like I said, it's always driven me with a certain amount of passion to
Mm,
um, to pave the way for others. And I call it paying forward. And especially in the latter part of my career, I've done a lot of mentoring. Before your program, I used to mentor undergrads at Stanford. And so all along, the way it's influenced my career is I've always wanted to be in a position to pay forward the opportunities for others. So in terms of, it's interesting. I think both subconsciously and maybe consciously, one way it's also affected my view of medicine. So just go back to Barbados a little bit. Um, when I was young, I had a number of health concerns. And so I had a number of frequent visits to my physician when I was younger. My physician was a man by the name of Winston Scott, who subsequently became the second Governor General of Barbados. And my mom tells a story that I decided to become a doctor after one of our visits, and he gave me an injection, and I said, "Oh, I want to be a doctor because I want to be able to do that to other people." Not sure that's quite true, but I did want to be a doctor because I really felt the need to help people. But when he became Governor General, and I think this is either both maybe conscious and subconscious, I saw that as a physician, it wasn't your influence was not just limited to clinical care. He then went on to become this politician, the Governor General of the island. And I really realized that as a physician, you could have influence outside the sphere of medicine. And so
mhm,
I think that my career has always been like that. I think if you're in academics, obviously there's teaching, there's research, there's clinical work. If you're not in academic medicine, I think being able to do other things outside of medicine is something that's really been important to me in terms of.
mm, mhm, mhm. How do you believe we can make the field of academic medicine more inclusive to and accessible to first generation folks?
I think you have to have an institution that's committed to that.
Mm,
You have to, I think I said this, you not only have to have an institution, you then have to have individuals who are willing to be supportive, to be mentored, to mentor, and to be advocates. And you just have to provide an environment where people can thrive. So I think that's really that's the one of the main ways. You just have to be open to having people who are a little bit different, who come from a different background. You have to be willing to give them opportunities. And I have a lot of my own examples who are willing to push you up the ladder, if you will.
mhm, mhm. You have been an amazing mentor in our program almost since the beginning, since we started. Would you share any mentors or particular relationships that stand out that have been influential in your own career?
Oh yeah, that's an easy one. And I'll focus it mostly at Stanford. Um, so when I came to Stanford, I had done research, as I said, but it was mostly in the social sciences. I'd done some experimental psychology and research, but it was not basic science, lab medicine research. And so during my end of my first year, I applied for the Med Scholars Program at Stanford and was granted, got the Med Scholars grant. And I ended up working in the lab of, unfortunately now deceased, PhD professor by the name of Teen Ween Weidman. Dr. Weidman had gotten her undergraduate and PhD at Harvard, and she was a woman who was um, very supportive of students. She was an advisor throughout the Stanford system, and she was a big advisor and advocate for, I think, minority students at Stanford. And so what she did is she gave me an opportunity, right? I had not done lab research, but I was interested. And so she took me into her lab, knowing that she would have to spend extra time, extra training, because obviously this was something I'd never done before. She became not only a mentor, but a friend to me. Um, and she was an avid sports fan, especially tennis. We would play tennis at lunchtime and tennis sometimes at the end of work. So she was the first major one because she gave me a chance to really experience lab research or bench research at Stanford. And she clearly was supportive and willing to put in the time and energy to really teach me about that. The second person was Dr. Mervyn Mays. Dr.
Mm.
Mays was an anesthesiologist at the VA, and this goes back a little bit to my story that I always tell my mentees about mentors and also how you take control. So after a year in the lab with Dr. Weidman, she was great. We were friends, but at the end of that year, I decided that that research was not what I wanted to do. It was in cancer bio, and we were studying hypothermia in the treatment of tumors in mice. And I just decided at the end of the year, for a number of different reasons, that's not where I wanted to go. And as a true mentor and supporter and advocate, I explained this to her. I was very upfront. And she said, I understand that. And so I ended up discovering Dr. Mays, also had a history of being extremely supportive of medical students and giving them opportunities. I ended up going into his lab. And it was in his lab that I really started to love research. It was very productive in terms of the number of publications that came out of that lab, in terms of chance to present at conferences. In fact, for a brief period, I considered getting a PhD in addition to my MD because of that experience. Subsequently decided not to do that, but when it came time to apply for residencies, he had become such a mentor for me. Not only a mentor, but a friend. My rehearsal dinner was held at his house before my wedding. Um, he was just a wonderful individual. And when it came time to apply for residency, um, he did what I talk about, which is really important to having an advocate. Not only was he supportive, not only did he write me a letter of recommendation, but what an advocate does is he picked up the phone. So he picked up the phone and he called the top institutions that I was applying for. By the time I got there for my interview, they already know who I was because he'd already called and talked to them. And that's what I
Mm.
mean about it. That's really what I mean about the next step above a mentor is also somebody who's an advocate. So it was those two people had a profound effect on my career and clearly with Dr. Mays for me going into anesthesiology.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing. How do you celebrate being first gen, Dr. Nicholls?
I don't know, in terms of celebrating, I guess I share my story. I don't know if that's a way of celebrating it, but I
It
do.
is.
I have to say that during that first year and a half at Harvard, when I first confronted with those differences, I think there might have been a time when I was a little bit ashamed of my background. The fact that, again, I didn't have those three A's. Um, that obviously quickly changed, and because I learned that despite having a dearth of those three A's, those people who had them weren't necessarily better than I was or smarter than I was. I remember I've heard Barack Obama talk about this, and it's something that I've always felt all along, and it's true. And he says, and he's like me, we've had the benefit of going to elite institutions. And when you go to elite institutions, you realize a couple of things. A, most of the people there, they're all very smart. Some of them are really brilliant and geniuses. And then there are some that you don't really know why they're in those institutions. And they're not there because they're brilliant or extremely smart. They're there because they have parents or family members who pulled strings for them. And I've seen this all along my career now, since I've been fortunate to being in a lot of situations similar to that. So I quickly lost that feeling, that shame, if you want to call it that, that I didn't have the money or the affluence, the access, the access that some of these people had. So I celebrate being first gen because I'm happy to tell my story, because the saying is, where you come from does not define where you go or where you end up. So for me, I guess that's why I celebrate it.
I love that. Thank you for sharing your story. Is there anything else that you wish to share with our viewers?
Um, I think that, and going back to that point in college where I took that break, I didn't share the part of the story. It was very traumatic for my parents, for my father. My father and I did not speak for about 3 months, and we communicated via my mother. Part of that was, I mean, you and I share West Indian Caribbean heritage. Finding yourself, I don't think, is a philosophy that exists in the West Indian Caribbean community. And so
Mhm.
my dad did not understand what the heck I was doing. You're in this fantastic school and you're doing what? You're taking time off to find yourself? So I think that caused the rift for us, but it was important because it was the first stage in my separating from my parents, and also developing myself, my self-awareness of what made me happy, what was important to me, the goals that I wanted to pursue. So I think I tell my mentees this all the time. The sooner you can start to develop self-awareness, it's really a crucial part. It's not what somebody thinks you should do. And I have a lot of my mentees says, I think I should do this because I said, no, you shouldn't. If you're in a lab and I feel bad because I don't think that this is the right lab for me, then leave. Be confident. Be aware of what makes you happy. If you're somebody who needs to sleep, you're not going to be an OBGYN, okay? That's not the field for you. So you have to be aware of what drives you, what makes you happy. So that's just, and I just think that the whole idea, we talked about failure, and that was a piece of advice that somebody gave me. But failure is not the end point. It's just the rung on the ladder of success. Uh,
Mm,
and so you need to recognize that everything doesn't always go the way you plan. And
mhm.
um, to me, it's just that just means that you're starting to form grit. I think grit is something that's formed in a crucible. And I think that I personally believe that first gen students have a greater proportion of grit than people who I would consider privileged, because they're
We
not
do.
accustomed to having failure. They're not accustomed to having to persevere. So really don't look as failure as something that's an endpoint.
Beautifully said. Can I ask you some rapid fire questions?
I will only answer those questions if you also answer the questions.
Ooh, challenge accepted. no one's asked me that.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's go. The first one is, what are you currently reading?
So I just finished the book The New Czar, which is about the rise and reign of Vladimir Putin, by Stephen Myers. And so I tend to read a lot of biographies. I'm always interested in leaders in terms of, and especially people like Vladimir Putin, like my favorite founding father, Alexander Hamilton, because he was born in the Caribbean, of course, and obviously came from poverty, how they get to a position of influence and leadership, the decisions that they make, uh,
Mm.
how they deal with the challenges that they face. So I just recently finished that, and I'm now starting a book called Sapiens, uh, which is a brief history of humankind, by an author, Yuval Harari. A very interesting book. He's a great writer. I've just started that. So, but I want to mention a book that I don't know if you've read, and I really want to highly recommend to people. It's a book called The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois.
I just bought that book.
It's an absolutely fantastic novel.
I
And
haven't read it yet.
oh, well, great. So I'm recommending that book to people on this podcast.
Oh, that's so funny that you recommend. I literally just bought that book last weekend.
Okay. It's a great, great novel.
I
So,
can't wait to read it now. That'll be my next book. Well, I'm reading Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. She's one of my
oh,
favorite authors.
yes, yes. Okay. So
What's the last good movie you watched?
I'm going to say that I don't go to the theater as often as I used to. But I would say that not the last good, the last great movie I saw was Oppenheimer. Uh,
Oh,
I don't know if you've seen Oppenheimer, it's a very long movie. So it's like, prepare for, 3+ hours or whatever it is. Um, Very well written, directed, great acting. But again, the story of, the whole creation of the atom bomb and the fact that these scientists had to deal with these ethical dilemmas as they were going through the process. So to me, obviously, it swept the Academy Awards as just a fantastic movie. I do watch a lot of limited series or streaming series, and so one that I would recommend is Presume Innocent, which is on Apple TV. So those are two things that I've seen and I think highly of.
okay. I'll have to check that out. I'm not, my husband teases me because I fall asleep during movies, so I can't even remember the last good movie I watched. Are you a coffee or a tea person?
Definitely coffee. I love tea also, but I'm a coffee drinker. I have 1 cup of coffee every morning before I go to work, and on weekends I'll have a cup and a half, but I just love the aroma of coffee. And so
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
definitely more of a coffee person than a tea person.
Hmm. I'm
And you?
both. I'm drinking tea right now,
Okay.
but I am a coffee person too. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
I think I'm living in that place. The Bay Area Peninsula, is a fabulous place. I think the climate here, again, I tell people I'm from the islands. I'm an island boy. I don't like cold weather. I'll never live again in a place that has, winter. Uh, and I think the climate here is as, there's certain Mediterranean countries that obviously can rival it or maybe slightly superior. But when I put together everything that I like, being close to a city that has theater, that has opera, being close to a university, I think that living here is close to being my ideal place.
I couldn't agree with you more. For me, it would be the Amalfi Coast, though, in Italy.
I think Italy or Greece would definitely, if you were to tell me someplace outside the country, yes, I love Italy. Probably Italy's probably my favorite country to visit. So, um,
Same. What podcast, if any, are you listening to right now?
so I listened to I listened to probably about 4 or 5, but the two that I listened to the most are Pivot with Kara
Mm,
Swisher and Scott Galloway, and then Prof G also with Scott Galloway. I really like Scott Galloway. I find him to be irreverent. He's entertaining, he's smart, he's provocative, he's thought-provoking. He he's not tribal in terms of his politics, and he just has interesting takes on different subjects and topics. And I find that every time I listen to him, he and Kara have a sort of yin yang that they do between the two of them. They cover politics, economics, the markets, global and global and national issues. So for me, it basically combines all the things that I'm interested in. And then I also listen to a podcast called The Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett, where he brings stories of people who are very influential to life. And so I enjoy listening to that. And then I listen to a few other, The Daily or some other podcasts. But the Prof G and the Pivot are probably the two that I listen to the most.
yeah. Well, I listen to a lot of podcasts, but some of my favorites are On Purpose with Jay Shetty,
Mhm.
Daring Greatly with Brene Brown,
Okay.
and Criminal by Phoebe Judge.
Oh, okay. I don't know that one.
It's kind of a yeah, it's really good. Oh, and one more is How to Build a Happy Life by Arthur C. Brooks. Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Morning. Well,
Same.
partly because of my job, I'm up early, but even on weekends, I can't sleep late anyway. And I love getting up early on weekends, and it's just my time to think. I have my coffee. I may read a newspaper or read an article, and it's just my time to think. And it's always been my special time. So I'm definitely a morning person. I'm in bed very early.
Yeah, same. Same. I did my yoga class this morning with in Peloton at 5:30.
Oh, wow. No, I can't work out that early, but I'm
What's a song that always makes you happy every time you hear it?
oh, there are a number, but I guess if I'm going to choose a song, I'll choose the song Wonderful Tonight by Eric Clapton. I've been married 36 years to a wonderful woman, and every time I hear that song, it reminds me of her, brings a smile to my face, and makes me realize how special she is. So
Hmm,
that's my song.
I love that. I have two.
All right.
One is you're gonna don't judge me. I Want to Dance with Somebody by Whitney Houston
No
and Journey, Don't
journey.
Stop Believing.
Oh, okay. Um, was the judgment about Journey? Were you wanting me in judgment about Journey or having judgment about Whitney Houston?
Just my overall taste in 80s music. I do love 80s music. Okay, last question. What
Yeah.
is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
So I mentioned it a little bit before. It's the idea that failure is wrong on the letter of success, and therefore you should not be afraid of it, and you should take chances and aim high. And that was a bit of advice that was given to me. And I'm again bringing it back to Stanford. One of my other mentors when I was at Stanford, um, the late Dr. Roy Maffley. Roy Maffley was an award-winning professor, an advocate for minority students at Stanford. He was, I think he started the minority admissions committee at Stanford. He
Mm,
was instrumental in recruiting me to come to Stanford. And basically, he was really an advocate for diversifying the student body at Stanford, at Stanford Med School. I think he actually even also proposed having schedules to accommodate students who had children. So he was really very progressive in his thinking, and he was, he would take me aside and we would have conversations and chats, and he would always say, Ethan, just remember, if you failed something, it's not the end. Just keep aiming high, and taking the challenge. If you take a challenge and you fail, that's okay. Just get up and keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
great advice.
Roy Mackley is one of those, another third mentor that I had at Stanford that really was very influential in my life.
Mm. The best advice I've received also was from one of my mentors, a very dear friend, and she always says that we are human beings, not human doings, and it's okay to rest. It's okay
Yes.
to take a break, and it's okay to say no.
Mhm. I like that.
Me
I,
too.
I'm a believer in that because I always tell my family, I'm an island boy. I'm not rushing around. I don't like to be stressed or be rushed. I just like to relax and enjoy my life. But that's something that I also tell students, which is despite all the pressures and what you think you have to do to be successful, remember along the way to enjoy your life. You
Mm,
don't know how long it's going to be. And I'm very open with students. I share the experience with my father. And again, this was also a change in my career goals. My dad worked very hard and said, I'm never traveled, partly obviously didn't have a lot of means or assets to do that along the way, felt he had to work. He says, when I retire, I'm going to travel. And he retired at the age of 65 and he was dead at the age of 66. And so I always say, remember to enjoy your life as you go through the process. You have to strive, you have to work hard, but remember to enjoy your life. Enjoy the journey. That's important.
yeah. Enjoy the journey. I love that.
So,
Dr. Nichols, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure.
thank you. This was great. I enjoyed chatting with you. And again, thank you for your work with the First Gen program at Stanford. I've been involved and it's been just one of the highlights of my career and being on the board at the medical school. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being such an awesome mentor.
Thank you.